D.E. McCullagh, my name is James Nagle, welcome to The Irish Nation Lives. On Sunday the 10th of July 1927, Kevin O'Higgins set out on the short walk to his local church for 12 o'clock Mass. At a turn in the road, a man stepped out from a car and shot O'Higgins at point-blank range. With his assailant firing after him, O'Higgins turned and ran for cover across the street where he collapsed. Two more men followed and shot him multiple times as he lay on the ground. Though mortally wounded, he lived on for a number of hours, telling Eoin McNeill, the first person to reach him, that he forgave those who had shot him. The brutal daylight murder of the Minister for Justice and Vice President of the Executive Council, effectively the Deputy Prime Minister, sent shockwaves through the Irish political system, and the knock-on effects of his assassination would have dramatic and far-reaching consequences for Ireland's future. O'Higgins was a much-hated figure within Republican circles for his actions during the Irish Civil War. In December of 1922, he signed off on the death warrants of 4 Republican prisoners who were to be executed in response to the murder of a government TD. The condemned men included Rory O'Connor, who had been best man at O'Higgins' wedding just over a year earlier. O'Higgins was heartbroken, but with the rest of the cabinet in agreement, he signed. He felt that drastic action like this had been forced on them by the anti-treatyites and that such executions were necessary for national stability. By the end of the Civil War, O'Higgins had authorised the execution of 77 men. It was in revenge for this that he was shot by the Irish Republican Army in 1927. In the aftermath of O'Higgins' death, the Free State government introduced stringent public safety legislation to strengthen the powers of An Garda Síochána, recreating many of the emergency laws which had been in place during the Civil War. Habeas corpus was suspended, members of the IRA could now be tried by special military courts, and internment was reintroduced. But it was the introduction of legislation to vacate the seats of TDs who refused to take the oath of allegiance that would have the most dramatic and long-lasting implications for Irish politics. In August of 1923, the first general election held after the Civil War saw Sinn Féin take just short of 30% of the vote. Sinn Féin had backed the defeated anti-treaty side and refused to take their seats in Dáil Éireann as they would be required to swear an oath of allegiance, which included reference to the British monarch, one of the major points on which the Civil War had been fought. This granted the pro-treaty victors, McCullagh, with a sizable working majority in the Dáil. By 1926, Éamon de Valera, the president of Sinn Féin, felt constrained by this abstentionist policy. At a special party Ardèche convened on the 9th of March, he put forward a motion that should the oath be removed, Sinn Féin TDs would at least consider taking their seats in Dáil Éireann. This proposal was narrowly defeated, and the following day de Valera resigned as president. Followed by a significant minority of Sinn Féin's elected TDs, he formed a new political party on the 14th of April, Fianna Fáil. De Valera was attracted to the name because it was untranslatable, though numerous attempts were made, the most popular of which is Soldiers of Destiny. In June of 1927, at their first electoral contest, Fianna Fáil won 45 seats, just 2 short of the ruling McGarry government. However, they were still committed to abstaining until the oath was removed. On the 23rd of June, de Valera led the party into Leinster House. The door of the Dáil chamber was locked against them, and a ring of Gardaí were placed before it. Before they would be allowed to enter, the clerk of the Dáil asked them to sign the members' book, signifying acceptance of the oath. De Valera refused, and scuffles broke out as some members of the party tried to force their way past the Gardaí. Eventually they left, having generated a great deal of publicity. Following the assassination of Kevin O'Higgins a few weeks later, the government moved to bring the issue to a head. In future, candidates for election would have to give a commitment to take the oath before they would be allowed to stand. After being elected, they would be given 2 months to do so, otherwise they would be stripped of their seat. While this oath to take the oath was ridiculed by Fianna Fáil, de Valera realised that should this and other reforms the government were putting forward become law, his attempts to gain power and his manoeuvrability once there would be greatly hampered. Opposition to the oath started to waver. De Valera began talks with Thomas Johnson of the Labour Party and William Redmond of the National League about forming a coalition government, should his party enter Dáil Éireann. On the 9th of August, a special meeting of the Fianna Fáil National Executive was held, and the next day de Valera delivered a statement that the majority of TDs were in favour of entering the Dáil. By remaining outside, new legislation would block Republicans from political activity. Explaining his about-turn on a matter which had caused a brutal civil war, he declared that the oath was merely an empty political formula which deputies could conscientiously sign without becoming involved, or without involving their nation, in obligations of loyalty to the English crown. On the 11th of August 1927, Fianna Fáil TDs travelled to Leinster House in small groups and signed their names in the members' book. De Valera was the last to arrive, and David McCullagh describes the performance he put on when breaking with one of his longest-held convictions. De Valera took the Bible off the table and left it on a couch by the door, covered the text of the oath with papers he was carrying, and signed the book, stating that one day he would see that the book was burned. The assassination of a government minister had been the catalyst for this major restructuring of Irish politics. Gerald Boland, whose younger brother Harry had acted as De Valera's secretary in the United States, later said that entering the Dáil was a tremendous decision for De Valera, and I doubt he would have ever taken it if O'Higgins had not been murdered. On the 12th of August, Fianna Fáil TDs took their seats for the first time as Thomas Johnson proposed a motion of no confidence in the government. Even with a number of defections from the National League Party, it looked like the motion would succeed, bringing in a Labour-led government backed by Fianna Fáil, though the party would take no cabinet positions. The motion was debated on the 16th of August, with the newspapers predicting a 74-70 defeat for the McCullagh government, though the Labour Party would be down a vote as their deputy leader was abroad. A division was called, requiring each TD to go to one side of the chamber or the other to have their vote physically counted. The result was a tie, 71-71. The deciding vote went to the Ceann Comhairle, Michael Hayes of Cumanagoyle, who predictably voted to save the government. Even with the Labour Party down a vote, the coalition should have managed 72 votes. It was soon realised that John Jinks, a National League TD for Sligo, had gone missing before the division was taken, leading to a myriad of conspiracy theories in the national and international media. Some said that he had been kidnapped, others that he had gotten drunk in the Dáil bar and forgotten to return for the vote. Later, he himself said that at the last moment he felt that handing the country over to Labour activists and opponents of the treaty was too great of a risk, and left before the division was called. The defeat represented the effective end of the Labour Party as a major player in Irish politics. Hampered by their decision to allow Sinn Féin a free run in the 1918 general election, Fianna Fáil would claim much of their support in the years ahead. Irish politics would remain split along Civil War lines instead of developing along a left-right divide as in much of Europe. The government knew it didn't have the numbers to survive a second vote of no confidence, and the Dáil was dissolved just 9 days later on the 25th of August. In the election, both Cumanagoyle and Fianna Fáil gained significantly at the expense of the smaller parties, and the government was able to remain in power with the support of the Farmers' Party and a number of independents. Reduced to just 5 seats in the previous election, Sinn Féin was in no position to fight another contest so soon, and put forward no candidates. Other than a few independents, Fianna Fáil now stood as the sole elected representatives of republicanism. Having come in from the cold but failing to remove the government, a party which described itself as slightly constitutional now had to engage with a state whose legitimacy it largely refused to recognise. Fianna Fáil maintained an at times strained relationship with the IRA. They opposed measures introduced to combat IRA interference with jurors and gained favourable coverage in the Republican newspaper An Phoblacht. They also, at this time, nailed down an economic policy. By developing Irish industry and placing high tariffs on imports, De Valera believed that they could reduce Ireland's high rates of unemployment and immigration. At the party Ardèche in October of 1929, he declared that the majority of Ireland's imports could be produced at home, creating up to 90,000 jobs. In 1928, he also committed to withholding land annuities, payments to be made to the British Treasury under various land acts, using the money instead to reduce taxation. These policies found a wide base of support, especially among smaller farmers, and they were in a strong position in January of 1932 when W.T. Cosgrave called a general election. Cumanagoyle campaigned on its record in government, and as the party of law and order. Fianna Fáil campaigned on its economic policies and its commitment to removing the Oath of Allegiance. The IRA revoked its ban on members working at or voting in elections and called on them to vote against McCullagh, effectively endorsing Fianna Fáil. As polling day drew closer, alarm bells began to ring in the British administration. Both King George V and J.H. Thomas, the Secretary of State for the Dominions, expressed fears that De Valera could take office. Thomas warned colleagues that attempts by the Irish to withhold the annuities or remove the oath would have to result in sanctions. Fianna Fáil ran a more active campaign than Dáil, who focused on linking their opponents with communism and the IRA. Fianna Fáil rallies harked back to the excitement of the 1918 general election. 12,000 people gathered for a speech by De Valera in Cork, while in Kerry he was met by marching bands and torchbearers. Dáil were overconfident that their previous record and commitment to stability would see them through, but on the day, Fianna Fáil was able to marshal its supporters more effectively. They gained 15 seats, leaving them just short of an absolute majority. With the support of the Labour Party, Dáil could have clung on to power. Instead, they gambled that Fianna Fáil's inexperience in office would see a government formed by them collapse within a year, finishing off the party. Labour were unlikely to support Dáil anyway, and after working out a programme with Fianna Fáil, they committed to supporting De Valera. When Dáil Éireann met on the 9th of March 1932, a number of Fianna Fáil TDs carried revolvers, fearful that Dáil would use the army to maintain power. As support for Fianna Fáil grew throughout late 1931, so too did rumours that the Garda Commissioner, Eoin O'Duffy, was looking for support from within the army to stage a coup should they ever come to power. Fianna Fáil had promised to do away with ex-soldiers being given priority for state jobs and had constantly denounced the high pensions given to the army by the Dáil government, leading some to believe that these would be taken away if Fianna Fáil got into office. While rumours circulated in the weeks ahead, this came to nothing, and the first ever change of government happened peacefully. With the support of Labour and some independents, including the future Fine Gael leader James Dillon, Éamon de Valera was elected President of the Executive Council, 10 years after resigning as President of the Republic following the treaty debates. Fianna Fáil began to implement their policies immediately. A few hours after being appointed Minister for Defence, Frank Aiken, the former IRA Chief of Staff, visited Arbour Hill Prison to meet with IRA members interned there. The following day, they were released. The public safety legislation which created military courts was suspended and the ban on the IRA was lifted. A general amnesty was issued, and amongst those to benefit were the men who had killed Kevin O'Higgins in 1927. In July, the government defaulted on its land annuity payment, and Britain responded by placing a 20% tariff on Irish agricultural goods. The Free State retaliated with taxes on British goods such as cement, electrical appliances, steel and coal. The economic war, which would rage until 1938, had begun. The Oath of Allegiance, however, was harder to do away with. Though a bill was passed in the Dáil to remove it from the Constitution in April, bringing instant condemnation from Britain, the bill was defeated in the Seanad, the upper house of the Irish Parliament. This meant that the bill would become law after an 18-month delay, unless the Dáil was dissolved before then, in which case it would lapse. By the end of the year, cracks were beginning to show in Labour's support for the government, and De Valera believed that he could win a majority by going to the people when the other party's finances were still low from the previous election. In January of 1933, with no warning, De Valera called a snap general election, with only 3 weeks of canvassing at the height of winter. Fianna Fáil campaigned on their economic policies and now added the abolition of the Seanad to their list of reforms. The IRA was beginning to lose faith in Fianna Fáil, claiming that they were professing republican and even revolutionary aims and yet doing little to give effect to them, but again came out against Dáil and called for the people to return the current government. The IRA had also taken to clashing with the Army Comrades Association at meetings of Dáil. Made up of ex-National Army soldiers and closely linked to Dáil, a number of the organisation's leaders were standing for that party in the general election. Within a year, Influenced by continental fascism, they would adopt the blue shirt uniform, which would give them the nickname they would become better known by. The economic war hadn't hit hard yet, and De Valera had shown a commitment to undoing the most disagreeable parts of the treaty and the most onerous of Ireland's financial obligations. McCullagh expected to be back in office within a year, but had misjudged badly. Fianna Fáil won the first ever absolute majority in the history of the state, allowing them to lead without the need for Labour. De Valera would hold office uninterrupted until 1948, and the party he created would remain the largest in the state until 2011. De Valera now had an absolute mandate from the Irish people for his constitutional reforms and his stance on the land annuities. Fears that the government would unfairly target the army and the Gardaí had disappeared, allowing them to move against those that it considered to be a serious threat. Just 2 weeks after resuming office, De Valera summoned Eoin O'Duffy to a meeting and informed him that he was to be relieved of his position as Garda Commissioner. While he was offered a different position in the civil service on equal pay, O'Duffy refused. A charismatic individual with an established military record during the War of Independence and the Civil War, including sitting on the War Council of Three with Michael Collins and Richard Mulcahy during the latter conflict, O'Duffy was headhunted by the Army Comrades Association following his dismissal. In July, the organisation renamed itself the National Guard and elected O'Duffy as its new leader. Those who had fought for and stood in defence of the treaty were on the back foot. McCullagh had been defeated in 2 successive elections, and many in the party believed that a new approach was needed if they were to stop De Valera and return to office. O'Duffy's meteoric rise continued in September of 1933 when McCullagh, the Centre Party and the National Guard merged to form a new party which he would lead, called Fearghal. This has been the first in a 4-part series on the events that led to Ireland's policy of neutrality during the Second World War. In this episode, I looked at how the assassination of a government minister led to Fianna Fáil coming to office less than a decade after the Civil War. Through the 1930s, Éamon de Valera's constitutional and economic reforms were designed to secure Irish sovereignty and establish self-sufficiency. As such, he would commit Ireland to a policy of neutrality, and with him in office, only a direct attack on the country would bring Ireland into the war. In the next episode, I'll take a look at Fearghal and the Blueshirts. Fianna Fáil's rise had displaced the post-Civil War elite and created a fear in the state security forces that they would be victims of retaliation now that the Republicans were in government. Their links to the IRA also encouraged a belief that Fianna Fáil was setting the stage for a complete seizure of power. Devastated by the defeat in 1933, those parties arrayed against Fianna Fáil joined forces in an attempt to provide a revitalised and credible alternative, while the Blueshirts drew in many of those fearful of a Republican takeover, jumping from defence of the Constitution to, potentially, threats of a fascist coup. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date with new episodes on the anniversary of major events during the Irish Revolution and the Emergency. Accordia, thank you for joining me on The Irish Nation Lives. Slán go fóill.